The Jordan Poole trade's most important part? It's not Jordan Poole or any other player. I'll tell you what national media is missing about that trade. Plus, the best remaining moves the Pelicans could make. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we're going to dive into some transactional things here. I'm going to tell you what national media is missing about the Jordan Poole trade, and it has nothing to do with Jordan Poole. Plus, we're going to focus on the next move the Pelicans should make. It needs to be a big man. I'll give you a couple of names, including some surprising ones, and then if they don't want to do a big man, we're going to look at another smaller move or two that the Pelicans could do. So we're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And of course, you can now watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. You can also watch Locked On Saints, Locked On LSU, and Locked On SEC. We got Ross Jackson, Matt Moscona, Chris Gordy, myself. Three of those guys, the other three. It's like an all-star team right there, and then I'm just kind of in the mix here. But let's get into the Pelicans stuff here, because I've been seeing a lot of, the like off-season reviews, and I'm seeing people miss maybe the most important thing about the Jordan Poole trade for CJ McCollum. And you can debate whether Jordan Poole is better or not than CJ McCollum. And honestly, there's arguments to be made for either way with it. And one of the complaints that I've seen repeatedly about this trade is, well, Jordan Poole has an extra year on his deal compared to CJ McCollum. And I'm here to tell you that's the entire point of this trade. Maybe not the entire point, but it's a really big part of this trade. Look, with the way the NBA salary cap works with kind of, tiers, right? The soft cap, then the luxury tax, then the first apron, second apron, and so on. If you have a $30 million expiring deal, but you're over the salary cap, over the soft cap, I should say, it doesn't then mean that you have $30 million to spend. And the Pelicans right now are significantly over the salary cap, the soft cap, and project to be well over it next year too. So even if you let CJ McCollum expire on $30 million, you might get $8 million of that to spend in free agency. And at that point, it's better to operate as an over the cap team. And those of you who are everydayers know what that is. And I've done a number of shows about this. It's better to operate as an over the cap team and then have access to the full mid-level exception. The Pelicans aren't quite at that level right now, projecting for next year, but they can easily get to that point where you can spend the $15 million on the mid-level exception if you need to. But losing CJ and then just only having $8 million in cap space plus the room mid-level exception, so you're looking at about $15 million to then spend combined there, doesn't do you any good, right? That's not going to get you the type of replacement you need. And here, so adding someone who's under contract next year, to me, is actually a smart thing to do. Now, if the Pelicans were going to go through a rebuild where you want to clear cap space, not to spend it on free agents, but to trade for bad contracts and have teams attach picks to that, like what the Thunder have done leading up to them winning the title this year, that's an entirely different story. But the Pelicans aren't going to do that, right? They've made that very clear that there is no rebuild. They're only going to just continue going forward to try and compete and win. And if you're going to do that, you're going to be an over-the-cap team. So letting someone just expire and getting the money off the books doesn't actually give you more financial flexibility to help you achieve those kind of competing type goals. So this move of trading CJ McCollum, and he was always going to get moved up until before the trade deadline, and he wasn't going to get moved for expiring salary. So if they feel Jordan Poole gives you equivalent production to CJ McCollum, plus you get Sadiq Bey here, and you have Jordan Poole under contract for next year. That's actually a smart deal in terms of just the money, in my opinion, when it comes down to it. Now, you can trade Jordan Poole next offseason if you need to. You kind of just keep spinning it forward, in a sense, right? Kicking the can down the road till eventually maybe you go through a rebuild. Look, for a team that's trying to compete, and look, we're not debating whether they should be trying to compete or not. That's an entirely different discussion. This is a smart piece of business, in my opinion, and I don't think it was a wrong thing to try and do. You know, the other thing is, say you cleared the cap space. Say you had cap space to spend, right? Everydayers know this. Big names don't change teams in free agency anymore. That's not how it works. It hasn't for a few years and won't for a few years going forward. No team has money to spend in free agency, so players just extend with their teams and then get traded at a later date. That's how this is working here. But then, to tie it into what we talked about yesterday, everydayers are getting everything today. It's all kind of coming together, isn't it? You know, there isn't a great perception on this team around the league. So if you're a free agent, do you want to come to New Orleans? Look, money's the number one thing when it comes to a free agent, and they'll usually take the most money. So you could get some people like that. But if all things are equal, they're not going to choose New Orleans. This team has never been a player in free agency and likely never will when it comes to big, influential, like game-changing players. So if that's the case, why have money to spend in free agency if you're not going to be able to do what you want with it or get the people that you want? So adding a player who's under contract next year, yes, is actually a smart thing to do. And national media is completely missing that point, I think, when it comes to it. Now, look, I think a lot of people just want to clown on the Pelicans right now, truthfully, based off of that draft night trade and be like, what are they thinking? And then this kind of just is a way to pile on a little bit more. In some sense, I kind of get it, but you've at least got to look at what they're, you know, the ramifications further down the line. And that is something that, you know, I can see, one, covering this team on a daily basis and as close as I do. This is why you come to the Locked On Network for this kind of stuff, right? It's the local experts, you know, in a kind of national media platform. And that's the important thing when it comes to it. Biggest stories, local experts. This is the type of like nuance and insight you don't get anywhere else. So look, whether or not you like Jordan Poole, getting someone who's under contract longer than CJ McCollum was actually an important thing that this team was going to do, regardless of whether it was Joe Dumars or David Griffin or whoever they would have hired here. A move like this was always going to be in the cards of trading CJ for someone with more years on his deal. And that is an important thing for this team to do with the goals that they have right now. Again, different debate of whether they should be trying to compete or not. And you'll remember I argued early on in the offseason, even before Joe Dumars took over, you know, that they should probably go through a rebuild, but they're not going to do that. So we're going to look at it through the lens of what they are trying to do, right? Because we're not living in kind of like a fantasy land made up world here. So if this is what they're trying to do, which is be competitive, and again, you can debate that, whether that's smart or not, but it just is a fact. What they did with trading CJ for Jordan Poole is actually a smart move. I also think you can view Poole as an upgrade over CJ. You don't want him to be a primary ball handler. He won't be a primary ball handler here with Zion Williamson, with Jeremiah Fears, and a couple of other people who can handle the rock too, including Herb Jones. So I think it'll be fine. You want him being like a secondary ball handler, like tertiary, whatever 3 is, ball handler. And I think he's kind of in line for that sort of role. So I don't hate the move. Look, if you don't like Jordan Poole and you want to dislike this trade, that's fine. No problem with that. But if you want to dislike it because, well, he's got an extra year and that screws up their books, that money was going to be taken up by somebody no matter what. Somebody no matter what. If it's like, well, they don't have access to the mid-level exception a year from now or the full one, they could spend like $12 million of the 15. Like, what are we doing here? They're going to have full access to it, and likely they're not going to spend it all on one person anyway, given the way the roster is, right? They've used $8 million of the $14 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception that they have right now, right? Like, that's kind of where it is. Now, they might use more, and we'll talk about that coming up in the next 2 segments here on Locked On Pelicans. But I wanted to get kind of into, you know, that nuance of the Jordan Poole trade that I do think is being lost on a lot of folks. You know, let me know in the comments down below. Do you think they should have gone through a rebuild or not? Do you like the Jordan Poole move? Do you at least understand it maybe a little bit better? When you think about how the salary cap works, let me know what you think about just this segment, I guess, and everything with it in the comments down below. So coming up next, let's look at the big man situation, because I think the Pelicans desperately need to add another name to that. And if a big trade isn't coming, who are some names that could go after? And I got some surprising ones for you that oddly make a lot of sense. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, so you can track all your accounts, investment, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Look, if you run a small business or you do some, side work, like, I don't know, run a podcast, you got to pay taxes on the money you make here. And if it's not being taken out of your check, you might forget about that. You got to budget for that sort of thing. Monarch can help you with your taxes, potentially, if that's something that you need. Or if you're spending too much, like I was, on food delivery, you're going to notice it in the Monarch app. Or maybe you're just trying to save for a car or just build a nest egg or a home. Monarch's going to help you achieve whatever your financial goals are. And having everything in one app just makes it easy to manage your money on a day-to-day basis. And if you share your finances with someone, a partner, Monarch's going to help you all stay on the same page. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And let me know if you're an everydayer. Comment down below on YouTube. Don't forget, you can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network at 10:30 a.m. Central every single weekday. We are not going to drop down to 3 days a week this offseason. There's going to be 5 days of shows every single week till the season starts, and then through the whole season. It's going to be like a whole year of Locked On Pelicans, 5 days a week. I'm excited to talk about this team. I find them very interesting. Even the little things like the Jordan Poole trade and some of the nuances with that. We've got you covered here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. Training camp is basically here. Tyler Shook has signed his deal, fully guaranteed. Is he going to be QB1? Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast is talking all things black and gold over there. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, the Pelicans need to add another big man, I think. When you look at their big man rotation, truthfully, kind of outside of Zion Williamson, it's not particularly great, right? When you look at it, is it particularly good? Misi's fine. Kevon Looney is fine. Derek Queen is injured in TBD on what he looks like, right? Carlo Makovich had some nice moments last year, but clearly needs some more seasoning. Zion Williamson is Zion Williamson. Trey can play the 4 a little bit too, but maybe a little bit better at the 3. Same for Herb Jones, but we're kind of taking Trey and Herb, because they're more wings than big man, out of, this discussion. And Hunter Dickinson didn't, on a 2-way is just on a 2-way, and it is what it is. None of those guys looked, other than Zion, are world beaters here. And so the Pelicans, I think, need to add some more depth. And when you look at this team, a team that a year ago was really not good on defensive rebounding, you need to add someone who can do that. And Looney, for his size at 6'9", undersized, is a pretty good defensive rebounder. But it feels like they're going to need some more help just in the big man space. And look, none of them is, outside of Carlo, would you call a floor spacer? And I wouldn't even call Carlo a floor spacer just because he's not proven enough at the NBA level. So what do they do here? They have about $4.2 million to spend until they hit the luxury tax. You can do that through the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. They have about, enough money in that to be able to spend and get a guy in free agency. But they also have a couple of traded player exceptions. And the way traded player exceptions work is you can just absorb someone into a traded player exception as long as that exception is for equal to or more than what their contract is. And so that means you could trade a second round pick and just absorb a guy into one of those traded player exceptions, even though the Pelicans are over the salary cap. Thus, they're relying on exceptions, the mid-level exception, a traded player exception, the biannual exception, all of those things, to be able to do that here. So free agents or trade targets, there's a few that they can do. And I want to look at free agents first because I think there's two that make sense to me with this team. And the first one is Chris Boucher, who is most recently been with the Toronto Raptors. Last season he averaged 10 points, 4.5 rebounds per game, but he can also shoot the three a little bit. This is not someone who's a rim protector or an elite defensive rebounder, but he's an average defensive rebounder, maybe slightly above average, at worst. They need someone like that. It's not going to swat shots away or anything like that, but he's got a good release on his shot. He's got good size. If you want to put a court spacer out there next to Zion Williamson, Chris Boucher is probably the guy that you would be looking at to go and, be the person to do that. He's more of a 4 than a 5 in my opinion here, but, he's 6'9", so slightly undersized there, but he can play the center spot at least a little bit here. And look, it's not like there's tons of great options out there for the Pelicans to go and get. So if that's who you kind of end up with, Chris Boucher just adding a little bit of depth there, I think could be a smart thing. 63% from three last season on almost 4 attempts per game. Career, not an elite shooter. He's gotten better over the past couple of years. 34% from three. But you don't really have anyone that you can trust to play significant minutes that's at least a court spacing three. And he, maybe could, I wouldn't call him a court spacer, but he's capable of doing that, right? Another name, and some of y'all are going to love this, Bol. At this point, people have been screaming, take a chance on him from years, just, with the family lineage here. For Phoenix last year, 6.8 points per game, 3 rebounds. He shot 34.4% from three for his career. In 2 seasons in Phoenix, 37.2% from three on almost 2 attempts per game. This is someone who's capable of blocking some shots. When you look at rebounding, he's about the same as Chris Boucher. He's slightly better when it comes to blocking shots, though certainly not elite in any capacity when it comes to it. He's also just given his kind of, size. He's tall, don't get me wrong, at 7'3", but he's a 4. He's not a 5. He doesn't have the bulk to kind of handle 5s down low and in the paint. So he's a name that you could, I think, keep an eye on here that you could probably get on a vet minimum. We're kind of in the spot right now where some players are just waiting, hoping they're going to get more money. That money doesn't seem like it's going to be coming. So we're starting to kind of hit the veteran minimum market where just whoever's left is going to have to take a minimum deal at some point. And it's maybe better to grab one of those minimum deals now than wait as spots dry up and maybe you get squeezed out and there isn't a place for you. In terms of free agents, I think those are the guys that you would really probably want to go after. But on the trade front, for those, for the traded player exception, completely spaced on what it was right there. I think there's a couple of other names that you could look at. I'll start with one that, I don't love the idea of, but I kind of get it, and that's Kevin Love. He's there with the Utah Jazz. He's making $4.15 million, so he fits right into kind of under the luxury tax for the Pelicans for their final spot that they have left. They have one open roster spot left. The problem is the past couple of years, he just hasn't played a ton of games, 23 games last year, 55 games the year before that. And then Miami the year before that as well, 21 games. This is not someone who's going to play significant minutes or play an outsized role for you. Last year it was 5.3 points per game and 4 rebounds and about 36% shooting from three. But when you look at the advanced numbers, in limited minutes, he's still a very good rebounder. You could argue he's one of the better rebounders of his generation. I think he has been that good, but he is still, a near elite defensive rebounder when it comes down to it. I'm pulling up his defensive rebounding percentage. Past 3 years, it's basically been 30% or higher. So that's been a really good thing. So I like that from him here, but is he going to be able to play a bunch? I'm not entirely sure. So there's that kind of aspect of things. But he's a name. And so that's at least an option for the team. You could probably just get him for free. So that's at least something you could do. Sorry, as one of the dogs is going crazy here. So that's an option, I think. You also have a couple of other names, but they're just terrible rebounders here. And that's Dwap Reith with Portland. He's a bad rebounder, but cheap enough. Dwight Powell, the Mavs probably need to offload somebody, but he's a bad rebounder too. Noah Clowney from the Brooklyn Nets. All bad rebounders, like atrocious rebounders, in my opinion. So that doesn't really solve the Pelicans' problem here of you need a big man that's going to be able to grab defensive boards. So maybe it comes down to Chris Boucher, Bol, or Kevin Love if that's the direction that they want to go in. But we've also heard that the Pelicans maybe want to look at another guard move. Maybe they want to go in the direction of another wing. There's a name that I think is maybe the best remaining free agent that you could probably guarantee some sort of role to. And I like that idea. There's also a recently waived player that might be worth taking a flyer on. And also you can maybe spite a team, which would be kind of cool. Let's look at all of that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. You got an office, you got a lobby with a TV in there. Put the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network on, especially from 10 a.m. to noon, where you're going to get 4 Locked On shows every single weekday. Get more people clued in to Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Saints, Locked On LSU. It's Matt Moscona. What more do you want there? And Chris Gordy with Locked On SEC, and you've got Ross Jackson with Locked On Saints as well. For your second listen today, it's got to be the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season in the association, so Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we just went over a couple of names the Pelicans could do for the big man spot. I'm curious what y'all think about Kevin Love, or is he just washed up in your opinion? And look, I think that is a valid thing to think and or say if that's the case here. But there are some other intriguing free agents out there that if the Pelicans just want to add a little bit of depth, look, you can sign, you're getting to the vet minimum time, and I think you can probably get one of the names, and the Pelicans only have one open roster spot. So that's kind of what we're looking at here, because I don't think as of now that there's a bigger move coming. So let's look at guards, right? Chris Paul just signed with the Clippers for kind of the homecoming reunion tour. I saw him photoshopped with a number 4, which is the weirdest thing when there's pictures of him on the Clippers and it's not like you need to Photoshop him into a Clippers jersey. Like, what a weird thing to do. That's besides the point, and whatever. But you still have Malcolm Brogdon and Russell Westbrook out there should the team want to go after like a veteran point guard, which, if you think that Jeremiah Fears isn't ready, I saw a stat. He's the only lottery pick that played in all 5 or top 10 pick, lottery pick, only guy that played in all 5 summer league games, which I kind of like. Malcolm Brogdon and Russell Westbrook are definitely options there. They're veteran minimums, right? Brogdon isn't the worst defensively, not going to be much of an offensive guy. Westbrook has a similar style to Jeremiah Fears, so maybe adding Westbrook to the team would make a lot of sense to kind of be that mentor. He is a good locker room guy, despite kind of getting thrown under the bus like repeatedly in every other team that he's been in. You also have Ben Simmons that if you want to really take a flyer could be an option there. But look, none of those names really move the needle for me. I think you could look at someone like Amir Coffey as the guy that they should really go after. He's probably the best remaining free agent that's not restricted. 10 points per game last season, 2.2 rebounds, but he shot 41% from three on almost 3.5 attempts per game. This is someone who he's probably average defensively, so it's not like he's going to actively hurt you on that side of the ball. He can play in the backcourt. He's more of a wing than anything else. 6'7", with good athleticism. He can switch a little bit, which is what the Pelicans want. That's a guy I think they should probably be looking at if you want to add some wing depth. Probably better him than someone like Lester Quinones, in my opinion. And that's probably the best remaining free agent, in my opinion. Another person to look at if you're looking at the guard spot is Jordan Goodwin, who was just waived by the Los Angeles Lakers so that they could sign Marcus Smart after his buyout with the Wizards. 5.6 points per game last season in 29 games with the Lakers, shot 38%. 4 rebounds, 1.4 assists. For his position, that's pretty good production in the role that he had here. He's a little bit undersized. He's not, elite at anything, but it's maybe worth a flyer on him. The Lakers wanted to keep him. I wouldn't be shocked if they're trying to get him on a two-way, something along those lines. Could be worth a flyer on if you just want someone who has some experience and, I don't know, maybe spite the Lakers a little bit when it comes to it. But in my opinion, if you're not going to sign Antonio Reeves, someone like that to the team here, Amir Coffey, I think Chris Boucher would probably, those two are the best players remaining in my opinion. And I would be trying to make a run. Maybe you sign them to a $3 million deal, right? Or a 1+1, 3 and 3, $6 million total. Give them the option, player option in the second year there if that's the direction they want to go. That's who I'd be looking at. Those are the guys. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. But it's starting to dry up out there when it comes down to it. And let me know what you think about the Jordan Poole trade. Does it change your opinion when you think about the extra year not being a bad thing if we put it in that sort of lens? Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be back with y'all tomorrow because we are not dropping down to 3 days a week at all this offseason.